I'm really excited to be here with this amazing panel. We're going to talk about diversity, which is definitely passionate and like near and dear to my heart. That's why I do everything that I do. So without further ado, we're going to get started. And Arturo, I'm going to start with you and pick on you since you're closest to me. Okay. So given that you and your brother Roy were involved in creating, writing, directing, and producing Frankelda's book of Spooks, can you share insights into your creative process and how your experiences influence the series that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. I think that we became a little bit tired about watching animated shows in which kids were not being taken into account, in which kids were always getting the same stories, always getting the same endings, the same lessons. And we remember that when we were kids, things were a little bit spookier. There were more practical effects, there were more twisted characters. So we really wanted to bring that aspect of our childhood to this day and age. We wanted to bring something fresh to young audiences, to make them feel a little bit scared, and also to balance that with songs. And this is why we decided to set the series also in Mexico City, because we really thought that kids in Latin America wanted to see something a little bit more mature, especially in the subject of horror. So we tried to give them something that has a lot of quality, that has great visual components, great music, great drama and cinematography. So we tried to make this show as unique and authentic as possible.
And I love you're saying unique and authentic as possible. And we really see like Mexican culture being center stage and abundant through the series. And so Irene, like as a cinematographer, how did Mexican culture and tradition, like Dia de los Muertos and stuff like that, actually influence your approach creatively to the series?
One way or another, in every project we have done in Cinema Fantasma, Mexico has been like the center of our stories. So yeah, we are lucky to live in Mexico. That it's a lot of things, but one thing I wouldn't describe it as is boring. So it can be chaotic, it's colorful, vibrant, and so all of these things I think helps in my work as cinematographer. And we also took some neighborhoods that are like really unique and folkloric in Mexico, and specifically in Frankelda, we use that to portray our everyday life, because yeah, you can say Mexico has a lot of culture and folklore, but for us it's like our day, you know? All the Mexicans are like, yeah, it's our everyday life, so we wanted to take that into the series.
So it's like, it's abundant because it is abundant
yeah.
in your life, so it's easy to incorporate that into the actual work that you're doing. So, you know, it's amazing how these things that we take for granted, they're always around, and they're in the background, you kind of pull them forward. And that's somewhat of what happens when you're listening to music in a soundscape, right? So Shirley, I'm looking at you. Because you composed Netflix Exo Kitty alongside Gina Huajin. And here you are, like two female Asian composers able to work on this together and really use your experiences to feed that soundscape that we ended up seeing, right? Like just that clip that we saw, I was swept up in the love. And so I was like, ooh, I'm about to get kissed, right? It was beautiful. How, can you elaborate more on like how your collaboration and your experiences really help like infuse that into that soundscape?
Gina's a really, really good, she's like my work wife. And we met like, at music school, Berklee College of Music. We just became really good friends, and we also just developed this like sort of mutual respect for each other. We just loved each other's music. And so this sort of, we just always supported each other. I think also her also being like a fellow Asian female composer and musician. And so we sort of moved out to LA around the same time. We always had each other's back, and so this whole, just us collaborating in general just came very naturally. And then when Exo Kitty came along, it was kind of, I mean, in Gina's case, she could relate to it a lot because she, this Exo Kitty sort of happens at an international school in Korea, and Gina was born and raised in Korea, and she went to an international school there too. So she grew up watching K-dramas, listening to K-pop, and then on my end, I was born and raised in Australia from a Chinese background, but I had so many Korean mates growing up, so I was also delved into the whole K-pop scene, and K-dramas were huge in the Chinese community, so my grandparents were always watching K-dramas, and so I was watching with them. So when Exo Kitty came along, one of the main things, I remember that, creator and showrunner Jenny Han was really specific about was, we want to dive into, because it's going to be a lot of K-pop, licensed music and a lot of K-pop needle drops. So we need the score to somehow sort of have influences from that. And also there were going to be some moments where they wanted to dive into the more sort of K-drama world. And obviously, as you know, it's not entirely K-drama. So there's still this sort of East-Western sort of fusion. And so I think because we kind of just knew exactly what she meant, just because we've watched so many K-dramas and we've been listening to K-pop. So I think because of that, we were able to establish our sound palette and our themes sort of very quickly. Because there are other shows and films that we work on sometimes that can take us, 5, 6 revisions, especially for that first episode or that first reel of the film or whatnot. Like, it's a collaborative process, and sometimes, we're not getting exactly the showrunner or the director's point of view, or sometimes we're misguided. We think we want something and then we realize in the way it's not. But I think with Exo Kitty, because of our background, it was just smooth sailing from the get-go, I would say, yeah.
Love that. And so we're talking about taking such rich cultural material, right? And using your own experience and kind of really getting it streamlined into something that is going to be relatable to everybody else, right? And I think that's a great segue to talk about Reservation Dogs, because we haven't seen a lot of rich indigeneity on screen, but those of us who know that it is just a treasure trove of stuff to pull from, right? And so Reservation Dogs is really being lauded for how it is doing indigenous representation on screen. And Varun, as an editor, you're getting all this material from creators that's just is a fresh perspective. I would imagine that even sometimes it's a lot of shooting, it's a lot of material, right? Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what is your approach editing to actually look at this material and start to get it together into a storyline without losing the vibe?
With Reservation Dogs, a lot of that heavy lifting is done by the writers, the directors, the actors, and I think that, from a schedule perspective, us editors were given a little more time than the average show of this length would get, because there is so much to take in. We do a lot of improv comedy as well, so it is a slog in the beginning to put it all together the way all the different ways that they played it on set, but then after that we really take the cue from the writers and directors, because it is a world that it is new to everybody, right? And it's new to even indigenous native audience members to see it played out in that way. What I did mainly was to try and find connections to it from my own background, right? And I come from a similarly colonized people with different details, and so I was able to bring that in. And I have my own complicated relationship with, how much do I know my Indian culture, how much do I like it, how much do I want to keep, and I think the kids in Reservation Dogs kind of have that same journey, that they have a certain distance from their culture, but they're trying to reclaim it, but it's all in a casual format. So, so finding my connections to it is what grounded me to start in starting to work on this. And the big turn in Reservation Dogs is when does the audience know that they have permission to laugh with the show? And that's a very key moment that everybody was talking about, because it is a very new format. It is a new style, a new tonal mix of show. And I think in the first episode, when the spirit character comes in, and he's kind of he's not the best spirit out there. He's kind of a mediocre spirit who's helping average people out, and just in putting his stuff together. And he gave us, the whole episode would have just been him talking. That's how much improv he gave us. But in constructing that is where we found the spot where we let the audience in on the jokes and say, hey, we can all laugh at this together, and we can all be lighthearted about this together. And so that was the approach. Like, when can we bring people in to the world, and when can we mirror what you kind of lead you somewhere where you think you know what's going to happen, and then surprise you with the aspects of Indigenous culture that are more community-focused society, and a little more irreverent with across the generations. There isn't kind of the patriarchal hierarchy that you expect from many other cultures, and constantly bringing those elements in was what helped me get into, how do we tell this story well, and bring audience members in.
I love that, and again, like inviting them into, here's where you laugh, right?
Right.
And then when we think about something like a Black Lady sketch show, it's kind of like you're probably laughing the whole time to some extent, right? But then again, Bradinn, there's probably so much material that you're dealing with, right? And the cast and the characters, they're having these really unique, fresh perspectives. What is your approach as an editor, since we're still, talking about this editing process, to look at all that material and all that perspective and really still maintain it, honor it, like bring it, the center stage, while also making sure that the audience is invited to laugh?
Yeah, I think similarly on Black Lady Sketch Show, so much of that work is done before I see anything. It's our creator, Robin Thede, does a tremendous amount of work to staff the show with the people that the show's about. So a Black Lady Sketch Show. So our writing staff is Black women. Our director, Bridget Stokes, is a Black woman. She's actually the first Black woman to win an Emmy in that category. Yes, it's wonderful. Our performers are wonderfully talented Black women who bring their experience and their voice to their parts on set. Hair, makeup, wardrobe, you know where I'm going with it. And, an editorial for my season, I'm not a woman, but we were also the first all-Black team to win an Emmy in any category ever. And so that richness of voices and perspective and that depth is kind of already in the process. It's baked into the process. It's baked into every stage of production. So editorially, by the time I get that footage, I already have that much to work with. And I think my job as an editor on the show is first and foremost to make it funny as a sketch comedy show, and to make it exciting and thrilling and cinematic, and have an audience engage with the material, because if it's not well crafted, we're not even having this conversation, nobody's watching it. I think part of my job too, if we're talking about those layers that we're capturing in the performances, I'm looking at it when I'm going through the raw footage. I'm combing through it. I'm finding those elements that peel back. What are the unique voices? What are the experiences? What's the perspective that you only get on this show with these set of performers? And we have a whole arsenal of tools in our bag as editors, and you know, in the storytelling, it could be music, it could be editorial choices, it could be any number of things that you're reaching for to tell these stories in a way that's really authentic to the characters and to the audience. And I think that's something really special about this show. You know, the thing about Black Lady Sketch Show is it's not, most of the sketches aren't about race, they're not about racial relationships. It's a show about Black women, it's about thoughts and experiences. And so naturally, you know, that centers on the things that matter to our writers and to our performers. You know, I think as editors, and as Black editors, we get to really lean into our own experiences, just like you were saying, and find the things that are, you know, culturally specific, and weave those in with things that are more grabbable. That's a terrible word, but things that a broader audience can also grab and enjoy and laugh at. Like you take the piece of the sketch that played Product Purge. You know, it's got kind of a dual nature where the concept of the sketch is set in a world like the Purge, but instead of, you know, you have so many hours where all crime is legal, you have so many minutes where you can return any hair care product that didn't work for you that year and get a full refund. And like, you know, on its face, to, I think most Black women, that's a funny, immediately funny and relatable situation. But I think in a broader sense, a lot of people can laugh at that even if they don't have that specific experience. And I think that's what the show does really well, is to give you a bit of both. And that's part of our jobs as editors, is to you know, make both those things happen in a really well-crafted, well-thought-out way that delivers for our audience, for our core audience and our broader audience.
No, I mean, the struggle is real with the hair care products. And that's when you know the specificity is universality, right? And that's a lot of what we're getting to when I'm listening to, you know, what all of you shared in relation to your process. You know, you're talking about a collaborative process where you have to bring in some of your specificity, right? And you're also thinking about the specificity, getting the specificity of other people on the team to put something together. So this automatically makes me start thinking about a culture of inclusion, right? Because we know that that's really, that all this diversity that we have is like life's way of giving us thick data so that we can actually apply this to the creative process and show what it is to be human, the vastness of what it means to be human. So I'm gonna throw a question out to all of you. You know, in relation to that culture of inclusion, whether it be something that came from you or another crew member, how do you start to foster it? And maybe, Arturo, I'll start with you, because I would love to hear your perspective as a showrunner on this. Like, how do you kind of nurture that culture of inclusion?
It was very funny for us because working with the amazing executives of Warner Bros. Latin America, it turned out that there was almost no shows being made before ours. Usually Cartoon Network and HBO Max would just dub original shows into Spanish for the Mexican audience. So when we got this opportunity to create a brand new show specifically for Latin America, we were given the chance to do whatever we wanted. And we have worked with a lot of Hollywood companies, and we have produced a lot of content in English. And there are always like many filters and approvals to be made. But on our case, since this was for Latin America, it was more of an experiment of Warner Brothers Latin America. So when we pitched the original series, it was very international. We never spoke about setting it in Mexico. We never spoke about Dia de los Muertos. We never spoke about something specific. It was just like kids with monsters and horror stories. But when the pilot was green lighted, or green lit, I don't know how to say it.
We don't.
Well, green lit.
Green lit.
Yeah, green lit. We decided to Mexicanize the show as much as possible without contradicting what we have already sold to the network. So instead of having like normal European or American witches, we decided to go fully indigenous to the stories that resonated to us, to the streets became the streets of Mexico City. Our mermaid doesn't look like any other mermaid. It's an actual mermaid from the depths of the Xochimilco River. So what we tried to do to portray in the show with all the characters was life as we see it as Mexicans of Mexico City. And that's a life where we do not see cactus or sombreros or luchadores. We experience urban life just as any other big city, but we have received a lot of letters and compliments from people that feel included in the show because we portray Mexico by people living in Mexico. So this has been very interesting, and also since the lead character is a female writer, a lot of people have used her now as an icon or someone that they aspire to be because she's giving voice to creative Mexicans, especially creative Mexican women.
That is so cool. I love just when you were like, we got to do whatever we wanted to do. It's like, what? You're like, okay, well, we made sure we did kind of what we pitched. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a fun space to play with. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And trying to look, did anyone else have a thought on that code? Okay, because I have another question then. Just in relation to the fact that, you know, we're literally talking about diversity within this industry. And I mean, Varun, I know you spoke on this a little bit in relation to, like, you have a different experience with your Indian culture that you brought that still to what you were doing in relation to Reservation Dogs. So how has the immigrant experience influenced your Hollywood journey creatively, as a creative?
I feel like we're a whole bunch of immigrants over here, so hopefully you guys will relate to this as well. You know, people say a lot in the industry that if you're black or brown, you work twice as hard and you get paid half as much to make it in this industry. If you add an immigrant to that equation, it feels like you got to do it hopping on one foot with a birthday cake on your head, you know. And it is an absurd process to try and work and thrive in this country if you don't have an American passport, that's its whole process. But then the core of it is that I didn't grow up here, and I grew up before the internet was everywhere, and so it's a very different experience of access, right? And we're at Comic-Con. Comic-Con exists because people are into pop culture, into stories, into fandom, and there are many of these influences that I didn't have growing up. You know, my wife once in a while mentions things about Saved by the Bell and 90210, and these were not shows that played when I was growing up. So I was like, what is that? And the other big thing is rap didn't make it to India in the big way that it exists here. You know, the first rapper I heard was Eminem, and that's just a travesty.
What?
He's great, but it's a travesty, right? He's great, but it's like I should be, you know, I should be better educated, right? And so it's coming from that perspective of like you're in an industry that trades a lot in pop culture references, influences. When we talk about like, oh, we're trying to make this story as an homage to that other thing that had a big role in this subculture. And when you don't have those touch points, it's a big source of insecurity as an immigrant, right? And it's a competitive industry where you're interviewing against many other people. You're trying to you are trying to separate yourself from the pack in your own way. And when you feel like you have this one big deficiency, you basically just have to go and study it. Like, I feel like I know a lot of this stuff academically because I've put in the time to go and watch that. And, oh, somebody said something, I'm gonna go watch it. But I don't have the confidence of the lived experience of actually having, dance to that song in your middle school prom, And so I don't have that same connection to an R&B song as many of you guys do, right? So that's just the emotional aspect of it. Is like, are you going to be discounted because you don't have those same touch points? You're not as fluent in conversations, in creative conversations about influence and about what you want to achieve. And then there's the whole other aspect of like the logistics of being an immigrant in this country, right? How do you? We are principally an apprenticeship-based industry behind the camera. You kind of come up as an assistant under somebody, and then you put in your time. You learn the craft. You build your networks, and you grow into it. But if you want a visa to stay in this country, you have to be the head honcho. You have to be an editor to get a visa to stay here. You don't get a visa to stay if you're an assistant editor. You don't get a visa to stay here if you're an assistant camera person. And so you kind of have to. I had to at least keep both of those things alive. So I had to push myself to say, okay, I'm going to show up to all the Editors Guild events, and I'm going to show up to the TV Academy events so that I can make friends with editors who would hire me as an assistant editor and mentor me into having a robust career. But on the other side, I was also every evening and weekend I was working on low budget independent projects that paid little or no money, so that I could have an editor credit, and then show up at all the film festivals that little short film went to, drum up my press coverage. Because the narrative you're trying to build to apply for a visa is that, hey, look at me, I'm this big shot editor, I've got all these accolades, and all these people say I'm wonderful and they want to give me a job, so let me stay here and work. So you kind of have to keep both those threads going, and sometimes I had to choose between the two. And be like, am I going to go be a second assistant editor on this amazing big action movie? Because that would be a great thing for my career to get that experience, to meet those people, to have that scale of experience, or do I want to go cut this little indie feature film that's going to pay me very little money, because that's what I need for my visa application. And then you're like, what am I supposed to do? And then I end up doing both, and I never stay. I don't know. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I'm still an alien.
Of extraordinary ability.
Yes, extraordinary abilities. But yeah, I completely relate. I'm on my second O1, which is my artist visa, and it's all about when I graduated from college, you have this for us, you have 1 year to sort of do as much as you can and be like, hey, America, let me stay for 3 years, and so yeah, I can completely relate, because I was very lucky to have a composer's assistant job, but those are insane hours, not the best pay, and you're living in LA. And so I remember then late at night I would go to events, I'll try to be networking, I was terrible at it, but and then scoring a lot of student films where they're like, I'll pay you $200, I'm like, sure thing, and so it was just hardly any sleep. But I think that sort of it's like a blessing in disguise almost, because I feel that made you want to work harder, and I don't think I'd be where I am if I didn't go through all of that either. Yeah, but it just sounds like, oh my God, I completely relate.
Yeah, it is something that we don't actually get to talk about very often, because there isn't, we all each have our own journey. There isn't, if you're an up and coming, you came to film school here, you came to music school here, and you want to make a name for yourself, and there are plenty of us. I teach now at AFI, and you can see 50% of the class is international, and Hollywood and American storytelling is such a beacon of both success as well as like interest in like how diversified in terms of stories and the world building and just the sheer volume of stories are. Like people come here to say, hey, I want to be a part of this industry. I want to learn from the people in this industry, and I want to contribute to this industry. But the administrative aspect of somebody being not from this country, coming here and making a name for themselves, is just there's just a lot of obstacles. And since we aren't American yet, we don't have any agency in that situation, right? And so, yeah, you just have to build an immigrant household just like you build a minority household for everybody else. How you create a space for yourself and find people like yourself to go and work with.
I mean, you got a lot of nods while both of you were talking, because I mean, it's, I think, relatable to the people that you were saying, like, yes, there's that immigrant hustle, and that's that minority, which is actually global majority, like hustle, right? And it's really about being historically excluded in a lot of ways. So one of the natural questions that comes next for us is, have you seen and have you personally been promoting diversity and inclusion within the industry? And I mean, Shirley, I'm looking at you again because I know about the Composers Diversity Collective. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your work is with that?
Yeah, the Composers Diversity Collective it's essentially a non-profit organization that's main focus is sort of amplify underrepresented composers in the music industry. I mean, one of the founders is I have so much. I think he's an incredible composer, but Michael Abels. So he's a composer for Get Out, Nope. Incredible composer. And so yeah, I remember when that organization sort of first started, and I was sort of part of it when it first began, and I've never ever felt like that belonged in a group. It's I don't know what it is. It's like black, brown, like there's an understanding of what it is like sort of to be the other, especially in a very sort of white, male-dominated industry. And so it's grown a lot, and I think one of my professors once said, and it just always stuck to me, was, don't always take, make sure you give back to your community. And so that sort of always stuck in my head, and so this time around when they were sort of running for board members, I was like, sure, vote for me, you guys. But mostly just because I felt like I wanted to do more for the community. I wanted more people, especially music executives, showrunners, directors, studios, to know about Composers Diversity Collective. So there's no excuse to be like, oh well, we didn't hire a person of color because we don't know any. It's like, no, we have a whole database of it. But also it's just great to see all these projects here today, because I know most of the composers who are on it, and they're all members of Composers Diversity Collective. Amanda Jones, Kevin, the Latino composer. So it's really, really wonderful to see that there is more diverse storytelling, and because of that, I think a lot of things comes from the showrunners to hire composers of color too. So yeah.
That's beautiful. It's so important. I love that you're like, oh yeah, I know, like these composers are actually in the collective. That's a flex. That's a flex. I love that. It is, right? It's like, oh, we're not just talking about it, it's ubiquitous and you're doing it. And so, I mean, it's just how, and so this question out to everybody. In what ways do you actually think that diverse storytelling contributes to the overall richness and authenticity of content? Like, from your creative perspective, okay, and Bradinn, I see you nodding, so maybe you jump off answering the question for us. Like, why does this even matter?
I think, what a complicated question and answer, but if we kind of take a step back and look at the history of filmmaking you know, from whatever point you want to start it, you're looking at, you know, at least 100 years of stories being told from a particular perspective, from what you'd almost consider a default perspective, which is normally a white perspective. You have white protagonists for, you know, through most of the centuries of filmmaking, and everything is being addressed from that point of view to an audience who also has that point of view. And I think the thing that's changed a lot, especially in the last few years, and especially with the rise of streaming, is you're getting so much more creators, writers, directors, people across the spectrum who are telling their own stories and telling their stories to their own audience, but also to the broader audience. I keep saying the broader audience. You know, I mean, if it's Black Lady Sketch Show, it's a show for Black women, but it's not just for Black women, it's a show for everybody. And I think, you know, everybody has enjoyed it and indulged it and celebrated it. And, you know, Reservation Dogs, it's a show that is about these indigenous kids. And, you know, when I watched it, I was blown away because it's a world that I've never really been introduced to. And it's so specific in some ways to certain cultural things, but it's also so accessible to anybody else. And I can see pieces of me, I can see pieces of people I grew up with in those stories. And you get, I think the more you get these authentic stories coming from the people who lived it, as the people who are telling it, you not only get to, as an audience member, young or old, get to see yourself and your culture represented on screen, or get to, you know, even the little cultural inside jokes that we might tell, you get to participate in that in a way that you probably hadn't gotten to your whole life. And that is, like, that's really important. That's really important to see and experience. And as somebody outside of those cultures, you get to learn about it, and not in an instructional way, in a way that's like, you identify with it, or you know, you get to consume it in an emotional way that lasts for you and that you take with you where you're going. And I think that's such a huge leap from where things started, and it's encouraging to see. It's encouraging to see, especially young audience, be able to identify themselves on screen and say, yeah, that's me, that's what I want to do. And you know, in terms of your previous question about the industry, I think that helps that too, where you get young kids who see people making shows and making movies about them. They want to get involved in the process too, and that's going to really help to diversify our industry as a whole, in addition to what I think it's doing for the larger viewership.
I have a little snippet of a story that might help illuminate what Bradinn was saying. So I'm already working on Reservation Dogs. I have the job, right? So it's not like I'm just some average person on the street. And there was, with respect to the show, right? With respect to the show. And
Flex.
there was this scene where we needed, you know, it was supposed to be a kind of spiritual moment, a ceremonial moment in the show, and I was very diligent. I went to the, you know, looked on Spotify, like Native American meditation music, prayer music, or ceremonial music, right? And I found a lot of Native American creators who have all these tracks up there, and I downloaded a few, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try this out, right? And it was, you know, this kind of what you expect from when a non-Indigenous person is told, like, hey, you know, Native American music, it's kind of a fluty music that's, you know, that's kind of tranquil. And I put it in, and I sent it out. Like, okay, this is it. And when Shirley, the showrunner, watched it, and he's like, change that immediately. and I was like, oh, what did I do? And his response was like, we make fun of that shit. Right? It is so overdone. It is so stereotypical. It is so much the majority's view of what the majority thinks we do, and we laugh at it, right? And that is kind of there's so much of a gap that gets created between when the stories are not told from that community's perspective. And at least this ended up in a joke, and I got ripped for it every time. It was like, anytime I put a piece of music in somewhere, it's like, oh, this guy put the flute music in, right? And so that's the gap that we're trying, that is the gap that gets shortened when you have diverse content, stories, coming from the voices of people in that community. That's the gap that gets bridged. That's the gap that we can all come in and expand what we laugh at, what we cry with, right? And I think it really bridges gap between people understanding each other and finding our commonalities, and also understanding that the same kinds of differences that amuse you in your life, in your cultural community, are very parallel to somebody across the world somewhere else, right? And that feeling of connection makes you feel less alone in an industry that is, at the core of it, pretty isolated. It's very competitive. Well, a lot of us are individual performers who come in, and we're on shows for anywhere between 3 months to 6 months, or maybe 9 months, or 15 months, or 18 months if the show's not going very well. But then after that, we're all fending for ourselves, right? And helping us feel a little less alone because we understand people around us a little bit more. I think it's very valuable.
I agree 100% with them, because funny story, we're from Mexico and a few weeks ago we had a panel, we do like questions about the show and it's on live, no? And a girl from Russia sent a fan art and said like, oh, I'm a really big fan of the show, I really love it, and so. And we were like, oh my God, how she get to know the show? So I think what you were saying is beautiful, because a girl from Russia watching a show from Mexico, from Mexican boys and Mexican culture and everything. And I would love to, when I was a kid, or even now, to maybe, I don't know, watch a show from Indonesia or Pakistan or something like that, because you can identify even if you're 100 miles away. So
Thank you for sharing that, because one thing too is that as we're talking about this, and then Bradinn, you kind of talked about, wow, like we're miles from where we started, right? But there's still so much more mileage that we can achieve, and when I think about one of the things that I would love to see expand in the next 5 to 10 years in relation to diversity and inclusion, I would love to see the industry's mind open up to distribution, right? And what is palatable to audiences, these audience assumptions that have been made. And so as Irene, you shared, oh, here's this girl in Russia, and she's connecting to this show. Would you mind talking some more about what are some of the changes that you would like to see in the next 5 to 10 years in relation to just how the industry expands regarding diversity and inclusion and access?
Yeah, well, I think diversity makes everything more interesting. So I think, the industry has to know that. I think it's beneficial for everyone to have diversity, to have different stories from different backgrounds, from women, from I don't know, everything. So, but also I would like that not to be an issue. The normal thing is it doesn't matter if she's a woman and she's Asian, or it's a great story, it's something you want to tell. It doesn't matter where you come from. I think, that we don't have to really talk about that very much, because,
Looks like some thoughts.
I could pop in. I think, I think of course we'd like to see more diversity, but how do we get there? I think one of the things that I've found is the most critical to that is mentorship. And because I had no idea that, if we're talking about editors, I had no idea coming up that that was a thing that I could do. First of all, I don't know that I even knew what an editor was, but had I looked, I would have seen people who don't look like me. And I would have said, well, do I belong there? Probably not. And what I found is in mentoring kids out of high school, mentoring kids who are maybe low-level AEs and up, but especially like the high school kids is, in particular, high school kids of color, is they can be really good at storytelling. They could be really good at a lot of this stuff, but they don't see themselves represented. It never occurs to them that this is a viable career path. And I think that's true in post, I think it's true in writing, I think it's true in all kinds of things where we're just not as visible. And I think I've taken it upon myself, and I think a lot of editors that I know have taken it upon themselves to mentor the people that are coming up and say, this is something you should really be thinking about doing, because it's gonna vastly expand our pool, and then they get the chance to do the same thing after them, and we're just going to bring in new people and new ideas and new stories into the fold. And I've been very encouraged by the groups out there that are doing work like your group. There's Posted Up, there's Handy Foundation, it's You Collective, like all these groups that are working towards bringing people into our industry in a meaningful way.
That's beautiful. But, kind of piggybacking on that mentorship, I wonder if we can get some mentorship from everybody on this panel for a second. Because I'm sure that there's going to be someone watching this, and there's people in the audience that understand, like, wow, seeing someone that looks like me, and I want to get into what they're doing, right? And so they're aspiring, and they're from a historically excluded community. What is some advice that you can give to someone in relation to getting into the industry or networking within the industry that you wish you had had when you started out? And Arturo, I'll start with you.
I think a great piece of advice is that you don't have to try to make things internationally. You can go as local and specific as you want. And I think the world is hungry for that kind of ideas and stories. There's no need to do like the standard way of storytelling, the standard characters, the standard houses, the standard gardens. You can go as much as into specificity as you want.
Irene.
Yeah, I would say remember where you come from. Like, tell the stories you like, the stories that you feel. That it doesn't matter, like Arturo said, if they're international or you think that maybe people wouldn't be interested in them, but just tell your story.
I would say don't feel pressured to make safe choices. I feel like that was that was something that I made a lot of safe choices, and that was the society that I grew up in. It was very much like, hey, do follow these paths and you will have a good life. But they weren't trying to test it. It was very much like, oh, that's what everybody's saying. If that's what you do, you feel safe, right? And I think the world is very different now, but we're still carrying a lot of hangover from, times when things were even more of a struggle. And there's this cultural need to like tell your kids to make safe choices. But in making more and more safe choices, just get compounded into staying in your boundary. So unless there are enough of us making some unsafe choices, you're not going to be able to push that boundary out.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off what you said, I don't know if this is the best advice, but I can only speak for myself, and I just didn't have a plan B. I think I just really believed in myself, and that was my plan A, and that was it. But I think I was also very lucky because I entered into the industry where, you know, there's, as a composer, there's, you know, Alliance of Women Film Composers, which is very, you know, about women composers, and then Composers Diversity Collective came up, and I felt like, okay, like, talking about mentorship, there were people I could look up to, other than my peers. Because we were all, you know, when your peers come out, you're all struggling together. You know, you're on the same level. But when you have composers of who are at different stages of their career, you realize, oh crap, like if they can do it, I can too. So I think, you know, if you're a composer, if you're a person of color, if you want to get into the film music industry, Composer Diversity Collective is really, really a great starting point. We're here for mentorship, you know, we're here for really supporting our members. And yeah, I don't know, I remember growing up hardly seeing when I was watching the Oscars and the Golden Globes, it was like hardly any, especially in, you know, music film category, hardly any like person of color winning like, you know, the award for best music. But I'm hoping, you know, for 5 to 10 years, I hope that's, you know, that will change. So yeah, we'll see.
You know, first of all, big swings. I like that. Big swings, because you gotta get noticed. You gotta take the risks and take big swings. You know, there's so many people out here trying to do everything that we're doing. It's like, take that big swing. But you know, I would say that the same advice I offer everybody, and you know, my brother Noah, who's here, and is an assistant editor, I'm harping on him all the time about networking, and that's like, I think that's one of the single most important things you can do on the come up, is networking at every opportunity, whether it's in a group or it's one-on-one, or it's like, you know, coming up and talking to somebody on the panel afterwards. It's like, that's how you get remembered, and that's how you start conversations that can turn into other conversations, or start friendships, or start mentorships. And you know, I think probably most people that I know, and probably most people in the industry, they got their big start because they had done some networking with somebody at some point who recommended them for something, and then they got a recommendation from that. And there's so many like parallel moves in the industry to get where you're trying to get, that that networking piece is absolutely critical, and especially if you're a person of color. I think we tend to try to help each other out, and so if you see somebody who looks like you doing something you're interested in, like, go talk to them, because the worst thing that could possibly happen is they don't give you the time of day, and then whatever, you're in the same boat. But more likely, that conversation is going to create a relationship that's going to hopefully be meaningful to both your careers going forward.
Wow. You all have been so generous with your hearts and your minds and your experiences. Thank you. And now remind me, whose first Comic-Con panel is this?
I think it's all of them.
That's a flex, y'all. That's a flex. This panel has just been flexing and flexing and flexing the whole time. So, wow, thank you again. I mean, we're at time, and just another round of applause. Thank you again, Arturo, Irene, Varun, Shirley, Bradinn.